there exists a city where the very act of healing becomes a curse, where the pursuit of knowledge transforms men into monsters, where gods walk among mortals yet remain utterly alien, their motives as incomprehensible as their forms. This is Yharnam, a place where Victorian elegance collides with eldritch horror, where the cobblestone streets run red with blood that promises salvation and delivers only damnation. Bloodborne is not simply a game about hunting beasts through Gothic streets. It is a meditation on the price of ambition, the danger of forbidden knowledge, and the terrible transformations that occur when humanity reaches beyond its grasp. The story sprawls across millennia, from ancient civilizations buried beneath the earth to nightmare realms that exist beyond the veil of sleep. It weaves together threads of cosmic horror, religious zealotry, and scientific hubris into something utterly captivating. What makes Bloodborne's lore so mesmerizing is precisely what makes it so challenging to unravel. The game offers no straightforward exposition, no convenient narrator to explain what has transpired. Instead, it scatters fragments of truth across item descriptions, environmental storytelling, and cryptic dialogue. Players must become archaeologists of narrative, piecing together a history written in blood and madness. The result is a story that rewards curiosity while punishing the very pursuit of understanding, mirroring the game's central themes in its very structure. The world of Bloodborne draws heavily from the works of horror writer H.P. Lovecraft, particularly his concept of cosmic horror. In Lovecraft's stories, humanity exists on the periphery of a vast, uncaring universe populated by ancient beings whose very existence defies human comprehension. To gaze upon these entities is to invite madness, for the human mind cannot reconcile such alien truths with its limited perception of reality. Bloodborne takes this foundation and builds upon it, creating a world where the pursuit of enlightenment leads not to wisdom but to transformation, where seeing the truth of existence means losing one's humanity in the process. Yet the game is also deeply rooted in Victorian Gothic aesthetics. The architecture of Yharnam evokes 19th-century European cities with their towering cathedrals, cramped alleyways, and ornate mansions. The fashion speaks to an era of top hats and long coats, of elegant brutality and refined savagery. This juxtaposition creates a unique atmosphere where high society and primal horror coexist, where the veneer of civilization barely conceals the bestial nature lurking beneath. As we descend into the depths of Bloodborne's lore, we will travel through time itself. We will begin in the ancient past, in underground tombs where a superhuman race once served slumbering gods. We will witness the rise of a scholarly institution that discovered terrible secrets beneath the earth. We will see how a miracle cure became a curse that transformed an entire city, and we will understand how one hunter's journey through this nightmare might finally break a cycle of blood and madness that has persisted for untold ages. This is not a tale with easy answers or comfortable resolutions. It is a story that demands engagement, rewards patience, and ultimately reflects back upon those who seek its truths. The hunt is on, and there is no turning back now. Long before Yharnam existed, before the first stone of Byrgenwerth was laid, an ancient civilization thrived in vast labyrinths carved deep beneath the earth. These were the Pthumerians, a race of superhuman beings whose very appearance marked them as something beyond ordinary humanity. Tall and gaunt, with pallid skin that seemed to have never known sunlight, they possessed faces frozen in permanent expressions of haunting emptiness. Their mouths hung perpetually open, as if caught mid-utterance of some cosmic truth too vast for mortal comprehension. The Pthumerians were not conquerors or empire builders in any conventional sense. Their civilization existed for a singular purpose, one that defined every aspect of their society and culture. They were caretakers, guardians of beings so vast and incomprehensible that they could only be described as gods. These entities, known as the Great Ones, had chosen to slumber in the deepest chambers of the underground labyrinth, resting in a state that resembled death, but was something far stranger. The Pthumerians built vast tombs to house these sleeping gods, expanding their subterranean kingdom endlessly, always digging deeper, always creating new chambers for the cosmic entities they served. The Great Ones themselves defy easy description. They are beings that exist across multiple planes of reality simultaneously, creatures whose true forms might drive an unprepared mind to madness. Some appeared as towering masses of tentacles and alien geometry. Others took forms that vaguely resembled human or animal shapes, but were twisted into configurations that violated natural law. What united them was their fundamental alienness, their complete otherness from anything found in the natural world. They were, in essence, living embodiments of cosmic horror, beings whose very existence suggested truths about the universe that human consciousness was never meant to grasp. These Great Ones did not simply exist in isolation from humanity. Item descriptions suggest they desired something, though what exactly they sought remained mysterious even to those who served them. Every Great One, it appears, yearns for one thing above all else: a child, an heir, a surrogate offspring to replace the natural children they invariably lose. This tragic aspect of their nature becomes crucial to understanding much of what transpires in Bloodborne's world. The Great Ones, despite their godlike power and cosmic perspective, suffer a very human tragedy. They cannot sustain their own bloodlines, cannot bring forth living heirs, and so they reach out to other species, seeking surrogates who might bear children in their place. The Pthumerians understood this truth perhaps better than anyone. They developed rituals involving blood, sacred ceremonies where the blood of the Great Ones would be shared with worthy vessels. These blood contracts were not entered into lightly. Only those deemed fit to bear a special child could participate in such unions. The most prominent example of this practice was Queen Yharnam herself, the last and perhaps greatest of the Pthumerian monarchs. Based on item descriptions and in-game encounters, she was selected to bear the child of Odon, a Great One so transcendent that it had shed all physical form to become purely formless, existing as voice and presence alone. Queen Yharnam's pregnancy should have been the culmination of everything the Pthumerians had worked toward across uncounted generations. Here, finally, was the perfect union of mortal vessel and cosmic deity, a child that would bridge the gap between earthly and eldritch existence. But like all Great Ones before, Udon's offspring was destined for tragedy. The child, who would come to be known as Mergo, did not survive birth in any conventional sense. The Yharnam stone item description reveals that the infant Great One perished before ever truly living, though its consciousness persisted in the nightmare realms beyond waking reality, crying out endlessly for a mother who could no longer reach it. This loss marked a turning point for the Pthumerian civilization, though the exact nature of their decline remains shrouded in the mists of deep time. What can be inferred from the ruins is that their society began to crumble, not from external conquest, but from internal corruption. The very blood they had used to commune with the Great Ones began to change them in ways they could not control. A plague emerged, something that would come to be known as the Beast Scourge, though in those ancient days it manifested differently than it would in later eras. Evidence of this transformation can be found in the ruins of other ancient civilizations connected to the Pthumerians. In the sunken city of Loran, for instance, the scourge ran rampant. Where once a proud civilization had flourished, practicing its own forms of blood communion and fire magic, now only beasts remained. Loran's inhabitants transformed en masse into silver beasts, creatures caught between human and animal form, their bodies elongated and covered in shimmering fur, their minds lost to an insatiable hunger for flesh and violence. The city itself was eventually devoured by sand, swallowed by the earth, as if the world itself sought to bury the evidence of what had transpired there. The Pthumerian response to their own transformation and decline was not to flee to the surface or seek external aid. Instead, they retreated deeper into their labyrinths, sealing themselves away in the tombs they had built for their gods. They became custodians, not just of the sleeping Great Ones, but of their own secrets, guardians who would ensure that the knowledge of what they had done and what they had become would not easily reach the world above. Generations passed in these sealed chambers, and the Pthumerians evolved or devolved, depending on one's perspective, into something less than human, their forms becoming more twisted, their purposes more obscure. Yet some Pthumerians did escape to the surface before the final sealing. These refugees, distant descendants of the original superhuman race, would go on to found their own societies in the world above. Most notably, they established themselves at Cainhurst Castle, where they became the progenitors of a noble bloodline obsessed with blood and its mystical properties. The Cainhurst nobles retained the pale appearance and aristocratic bearing of their Pthumerian ancestors, though they had adapted somewhat to life above ground. Their castle, perched on a mountain far from any other settlement, became a center of blood magic and forbidden practices, a place where the old ways persisted even as the surface world developed its own civilizations and customs. Deep in the labyrinth, meanwhile, the Pthumerians continued their vigil. They developed necromantic arts, learning to reanimate corpses to serve as mindless laborers in their endless excavation. Bell-ringing women, priestesses of a sort, gained the power to call forth spectral maidens who could cross barriers between worlds. The warriors of Pthumeru wielded weapons of bone and cursed metal, their combat techniques refined over millennia of service in the darkness. And through it all, the Great Ones slumbered on, dreaming dreams that leaked into reality, shaping the world above in ways its inhabitants could never fully understand. When explorers from the surface world would eventually rediscover these tombs, they would find a civilization frozen in time, neither truly alive nor completely dead. The Pthumerians they encountered seemed less like people and more like echoes, repetitions of ancient patterns playing out endlessly in the dark. Some scholars would theorize that the Pthumerians had learned to transcend death itself through their communion with the Great Ones, becoming something immortal but hollow, eternal but purposeless. Others believed that what remained in the depths were merely husks, animated by ritual and habit rather than any true consciousness. The truth, as with so much in Bloodborne's world, likely lies somewhere in between these extremes. The Pthumerians achieved something remarkable in their era, creating a civilization that lasted far longer than any surface culture. They made direct contact with beings from beyond the stars, communed with entities that existed in dimensions humans could barely conceptualize. They learned secrets of blood and bone, of life and death, of transformation and transcendence. But the price they paid for this knowledge was their humanity itself, and eventually their very existence as a living civilization. Their legacy, however, would endure. The blood they discovered, the rituals they perfected, the secrets they uncovered would all eventually find their way to the surface world. And when they did, history would repeat itself in new and terrible ways. The beast scourge that had consumed Loran and corrupted Pthumeru would rise again, this time in a Victorian city called Yharnam. The pursuit of eyes on the inside, of communion with cosmic entities, of transcendence through blood, would once again drive humanity to the brink of transformation. The mistakes of the Pthumerians would become the mistakes of a new generation, though these surface dwellers would have no way of knowing they were walking a path already worn smooth by the footsteps of ancients. For now, in the deep places of the earth, the Pthumerian legacy sleeps and waits. The tombs remain, vast networks of chambers and corridors extending far beyond what any single explorer could hope to map. The great ones still slumber in their deepest sanctums, dreaming their incomprehensible dreams. And somewhere in those endless halls, the echo of Queen Yharnam's grief still resonates, a mother's cry for a child who exists only in nightmare. A sorrow so profound that it transcends time itself and shapes events that will not occur for thousands of years. Thousands of years after the fall of the Pthumerians, humanity rebuilt its civilizations on the surface world, ignorant of the vast tombs that lay beneath their feet. Cities rose and fell, kingdoms waxed and waned, and gradually something resembling the Victorian era emerged in the region that would become known as Yharnam. It was during this period of relative enlightenment and scientific progress that an institution of learning was established on the shores of a great lake, nestled in the forests west of Yharnam. This was Byrgenwerth, and its founding would prove to be one of the most consequential events in human history. Byrgenwerth began as a typical college of higher learning, dedicated to the systematic study of the world through reason and observation. Its scholars investigated astronomy, biology, archaeology, and all manner of natural philosophy. The institution was led by a provost named Willem, a brilliant but enigmatic figure who would eventually become known simply as Master Willem. Under his leadership, Byrgenwerth gained a reputation for pushing the boundaries of conventional knowledge, for asking questions that other institutions deemed too dangerous or heretical to pursue. It was Master Willem who first articulated what would become Byrgenwerth's guiding philosophy, that human intellect has inherent limitations, boundaries that could not be crossed through conventional thinking alone. He believed that humanity stood on a precipice, capable of evolving to a higher state of being, but lacking the means to take that crucial step. His solution was radical. If humans could not think their way to transcendence, perhaps they could see their way there instead. He spoke of lining one's brain with eyes, of developing an inner vision that could perceive truths invisible to ordinary sight. This concept would become known as insight, and its pursuit would define everything that followed. The breakthrough that would transform Byrgenwerth from a respectable college into something far more sinister came when the scholars made an archaeological discovery beneath the region. Hiring tomb prospectors, explorers skilled in navigating underground ruins, they began excavating the ancient labyrinths that lay beneath Yharnam. What they found astonished them. The tombs were not merely burial chambers, but vast underground cities, architectural marvels that defied contemporary engineering understanding. And within these depths, preserved through unknown means, were the Pthumerians themselves, still maintaining their ancient vigil over the sleeping gods. More importantly, the Byrgenwerth scholars discovered what they called the holy medium, a substance that would come to be known as the old blood. This was not ordinary blood, but something fundamentally different, blood that did not coagulate, blood that seemed to possess miraculous properties. Analysis suggested it originated from the Great Ones themselves, or perhaps from the Pthumerians, who had spent generations consuming and communing with such divine essence. Regardless of its precise origin, the old blood represented everything Master Willem and his colleagues had been seeking, a means to transcend human limitation, to achieve the evolution they believed humanity was destined for. The discovery of the old blood created a schism within Byrgenwerth, a fundamental disagreement that would shape the fate of Yharnam and beyond. Master Willem, despite his obsession with transcendence, recognized the danger inherent in the substance. He had studied enough of the Pthumerian ruins to understand what had become of that ancient civilization. The beast scourge that had consumed Loran was documented in the chalice inscriptions. The transformation and decline of Pthumeru itself was evident in the very architecture of the tombs. Willem understood that the old blood offered power, but at a terrible cost. His solution was to seek transcendence through eyes, through insight gained gradually and carefully, while treating the blood itself with extreme caution. His famous adage, "Fear the old blood," became the watchword for his approach to the cosmic truth. But not all of Willem's students shared his caution. Among them was a brilliant and ambitious scholar named Lawrence, who believed that Willem's fear was holding humanity back from its full potential. Lawrence saw the old blood not as a danger to be managed, but as a gift to be embraced. Where Willem saw caution, Lawrence saw cowardice. Where Willem counseled patience, Lawrence demanded action. The old blood could heal diseases, could strengthen the body, could potentially unlock abilities beyond human ken. To leave such power unutilized seemed to Lawrence not prudent but wasteful, even cruel when so much suffering could be alleviated. The ideological conflict between Willem and Lawrence came to a head over the question of how to proceed with their research. Willem advocated for continued study, for the development of insight through contemplation and gradual exposure to cosmic truths. Lawrence proposed something far more radical: widespread use of the old blood as a healing agent, blood transfusion on a scale never before attempted. He believed that by sharing the blood throughout the population, humanity could collectively evolve, could rise together to meet the Great Ones as equals rather than as supplicants. Before this schism fully matured, however, Byrgenwerth would commit an act that would curse hunters for generations to come. Reports reached the scholars of a small fishing village far from Yharnam, a hamlet where a Great One's corpse had washed ashore. The creature, known to the villagers as Kos, had died of unknown causes, but had brought with it strange gifts. Parasites that had lived within Kos's body spread throughout the hamlet, and the villagers began to transform, taking on aquatic characteristics, their bodies adapting to life both on land and in water. More importantly, these villagers seemed to have gained something that Byrgenwerth desperately sought: a direct connection to the cosmic entities, insight granted not through study, but through proximity to divinity. Master Willem, Lawrence, and other prominent figures from Byrgenwerth organized an expedition to the fishing hamlet. Among the party were some of the first hunters, warriors trained to combat. The beasts that occasionally emerged from the depths or the wilderness. Notable among these was German, who would later be known as the first hunter, and his star pupil, Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower. What transpired at the fishing hamlet would haunt these individuals for the rest of their existence. The expedition was not one of peaceful research, but of violent extraction. The Byrgenwerth scholars believed that the villagers had developed what Willem called eyes on the inside, that their transformation had granted them the inner vision necessary for true transcendence. To study this phenomenon, the scholars began a systematic campaign of brutality. They cut open the skulls of villagers, harvesting the eyes they believed held the secret to cosmic insight. They violated the body of Kos herself, cutting into the corpse of a god to retrieve her orphan, a child that had died before birth, but whose umbilical cord held immeasurable value for research. The massacre at the fishing hamlet represented a turning point for everyone involved. The scholars obtained what they sought, particularly the 3 umbilical cords they collected from various sources. These cords, described as granting eyes on the inside to those who consumed them, became crucial components in future rituals and attempts at communion with the Great Ones. But the price for this knowledge was high. The villagers who survived cursed the hunters and scholars with their dying breaths, calling upon Kos to punish those who had violated their sacred site. And Kos, though her physical form was dead, heard these prayers in the cosmic realm, where her consciousness persisted. For the hunters who participated in the massacre, including German and Lady Maria, the psychological toll was immense. Maria in particular was so disgusted by what had transpired that she renounced hunting entirely. She threw her beloved weapon, the rakuyo, down a well, symbolically casting aside the hunter's life. The atrocity at the fishing hamlet would eventually manifest as a curse, creating what became known as the hunter's nightmare, a hellish realm where hunters would be trapped eternally, forced to relive the violence and bloodshed that defined their existence. This nightmare fed on the sin of what occurred at the hamlet, growing stronger with each hunter who fell to the beast scourge and lost themselves to blood-drunk madness. Following the expedition, the philosophical divide at Byrgenwerth could no longer be bridged. Lawrence took what he had learned, particularly knowledge of the old blood and how to utilize it, and departed from Byrgenwerth to pursue his own vision. With him went other like-minded scholars, including Micolash, who would later found the School of Mensis. German, traumatized by the fishing hamlet and seeking purpose, also aligned himself with Lawrence's faction. Together, they would found the Healing Church in the city of Yharnam, beginning a new chapter in humanity's relationship with the old blood. Master Willem remained at Byrgenwerth with those students still loyal to his philosophy. He continued his research, focusing on gaining insight through non-blood means. He and his remaining scholars wore blindfolds, attempting to block out earthly sight and develop the inner vision they believed would grant true transcendence. Willem made contact with one of his students, a woman who, through either ritual or divine intervention, transformed into something else entirely. This was Rom, the vacuous spider, a being that had achieved a form of ascension, but at the cost of her original intelligence and humanity. Rom became a living barrier, creating a veil of illusion around Yharnam that hid the true cosmic horror lurking just beyond normal perception. As the years passed, Byrgenwerth fell into decline. The forest around the college grew wild and dense, as if nature itself sought to hide the place from the world. The grand lecture building where hundreds of students once attended classes was pulled into a nightmare realm, a twisted reflection accessible only through eldritch means. Willem himself underwent a transformation, his communion with the Great Ones changing his physical form. His skull swelled, filled with something not entirely natural, and his blood turned a strange silvery color, different from both human blood and the red of the old blood. He aged far beyond normal human lifespan, eventually appearing as an ancient figure perched on a balcony overlooking Byrgenwerth's moonlit lake, lost in contemplation of cosmic truths that had long since consumed his sanity. The legacy of Byrgenwerth cannot be overstated. It was here that humanity first truly understood what slumbered beneath the earth. It was here that the old blood was rediscovered and its properties studied. It was here that the pursuit of eyes on the inside, of insight as a means to transcendence, was first articulated as a philosophy. And it was from Byrgenwerth that two divergent paths emerged. Willem's way, seeking evolution through careful acquisition of insight, and Lawrence's way, embracing the old blood as a tool for immediate transformation. Both paths would lead to catastrophe, but in different ways and at different scales. Willem's pursuit of eyes on the inside would produce beings like Rom, creatures that had achieved a form of higher existence, but had lost everything that made them recognizably human in the process. Lawrence's embrace of the old blood would unleash a plague upon Yharnam that would transform the city into a nightmare of beasts and madness. Neither approach successfully achieved the transcendence both men sought, and both would die as twisted reflections of their original selves, their grand ambitions reduced to cautionary tales. In the heart of Yharnam stood a structure that dominated the city's skyline, the Grand Cathedral. This Gothic masterpiece, with its soaring spires and intricate stonework, was not merely a place of worship, but the seat of power for the most influential organization in Yharnam's history. Here resided the Healing Church, an institution that Lawrence, the wayward student of Master Willem, had founded upon leaving Byrgenwerth. What began as a noble endeavor to use the old blood to cure disease and alleviate suffering would ultimately become the architect of Yharnam's doom. Lawrence's vision for the Healing Church was straightforward in concept, if ambitious in scope. The old blood possessed miraculous healing properties, capable of curing ailments that conventional medicine could not touch. By establishing an organization dedicated to distributing this blood through a process called blood ministration, Lawrence believed he could transform Yharnam into a paradise of health and longevity. The sick would be cured, the weak would be strengthened, and humanity would begin its gradual evolution toward the higher state of being that Byrgenwerth had always sought. The early days of the Healing Church seemed to validate Lawrence's vision entirely. Blood ministration worked exactly as promised. People suffering from terminal illnesses recovered. The elderly gained renewed vitality. Wounds that should have taken weeks to heal closed in days. The church quickly gained a devoted following, and Yharnam transformed from a relatively ordinary city into a pilgrimage site. People traveled from distant lands seeking the miraculous healing blood, and the city's economy flourished as a result. The church used this wealth to fund further research, to construct grand buildings, and to solidify its position as the dominant force in Yharnam's political and spiritual life. But the healing church was not simply a medical organization. Under its structure, multiple factions pursued different goals, sometimes in cooperation, sometimes in competition. The highest echelon of the church was the choir, a group of elite clerics who focused on direct communion with the Great Ones. Where Master Willem had sought transcendence through insight, the choir sought it through a combination of blood and direct contact with cosmic entities. Their greatest achievement was the capture of Ebrietas, daughter of the cosmos, a great one they discovered in the depths of the old labyrinths. This being, for reasons unknown, did not flee or attack, but allowed itself to be contained beneath the grand cathedral. The choir studied Ebrietas extensively, learning arcane arts and developing powerful spells by observing and communing with this alien intelligence. Parallel to the choir, though separate from it, was the school of Mensis, led by Mikuláš. This faction took a more aggressive approach to contacting the Great Ones. Rather than seeking passive communion, Mensis performed grand rituals designed to forcibly bring cosmic entities into the earthly realm. Their ultimate goal was to bring forth Mergo, the stillborn infant of Queen Yharnam, believing that if they could successfully summon this formless Great One, they could gain audience with cosmic truth itself. The school of Mensis operated from Yahargul, the unseen village, a secret enclave where they performed experiments too extreme even for the healing church proper. The church also had its military arm, the Hunters. These were not the independent warriors of earlier eras, but organized forces equipped and funded by the church itself. The Hunters were divided into several categories. The Black Hunters, wearing dark garb and wielding traditional weapons, were dedicated solely to eliminating beasts. The White Hunters, also known as Doctors, combined hunting duties with research, studying the beasts they slew to better understand the nature of the scourge. And overseeing them all were the Hunters of Hunters, elite warriors tasked with eliminating hunters who had themselves succumbed to bloodlust and become as dangerous as the beasts they once hunted. Leadership of this hunter corps eventually fell to Ludwig, a warrior of extraordinary prowess and deep faith. Ludwig transformed the hunters from a ragtag collection of skilled fighters into a true military organization. He developed new techniques, designed improved weapons, and most importantly, inspired his followers with his unwavering belief in the righteousness of their cause. Ludwig's holy blade, a sword that could transform into a great sword, became iconic, a symbol of the church's power and the hunters' dedication. Under Ludwig's leadership, the church hunters became the most formidable fighting force in the region, feared by beasts and respected by common citizens. Yet beneath this veneer of success and prosperity, something was going terribly wrong. The beast scourge, which had been a minor problem in earlier years, began to intensify. People who had undergone blood ministration started exhibiting disturbing symptoms. Their bodies would grow and warp, hair sprouting from previously smooth skin. Their teeth would lengthen into fangs, their hands curling into claws. Some transformations happened slowly, giving the afflicted time to realize what was happening and experience the horror of losing their humanity piece by piece. Others occurred rapidly, especially during what came to be known as the blood moon, when the night sky would turn crimson and the line between man and beast would blur entirely. The healing church's response to this growing crisis was not to question blood ministration itself, but to blame external factors. They claimed that some blood was purer than others, that certain individuals were more susceptible to the scourge due to moral weakness or spiritual corruption. They established increasingly complex hierarchies of blood purity, with church officials receiving the purest blood, while common citizens made do with lesser varieties. This classification system did nothing to stop the scourge, and may have actually accelerated it, as the pursuit of purer blood led to more aggressive experimentation and blood harvesting. The situation came to a catastrophic head in Old Yharnam, the lower section of the city. An outbreak of what was called the ashen blood disease struck the district, an illness that caused victims to cough up grey dust and slowly suffocate. The healing church responded with massive blood ministration, providing the old blood freely to everyone in the district. This proved to be either a terrible mistake or a deliberate experiment in population-scale transformation. The result was predictable in hindsight. Old Yharnam underwent a rapid and complete transformation into a district of beasts. The church's solution was extreme. They sealed the district, trapping everyone inside, and set the entire area ablaze. The great bridge connecting Old Yharnam to the cathedral ward was blocked, preventing anyone from escaping the inferno. The church hunters stood guard to ensure no beasts fled the flames. What should have been a refuge became a mass grave, and the sky above Old Yharnam glowed orange with the reflected light of countless fires. The few who survived the burning, like the hunter Jura, who had participated in the massacre, were forever changed by what they had witnessed. Jura eventually returned to Old Yharnam's ruins, dedicating himself to protecting the beasts that remained there, viewing them not as monsters, but as victims of the church's ambitions. The burning of Old Yharnam should have served as a wake-up call, a moment when the healing church acknowledged that blood ministration was not the miracle they had believed, but a curse slowly consuming their city. Instead, the church doubled down. They declared that the problem was not the blood itself, but improper usage, contamination, or external sabotage. They blamed the vile bloods of Canehurst Castle, a rival faction that had obtained samples of the old blood through a betrayal by one of the church's own members. A woman named Annalise, Queen of the Vile Bloods, had established her own blood-based society at Canehurst, practicing what the church deemed heretical blood magic. The church sent its executioners, led by Logorius, to destroy Canehurst completely. This crusade succeeded in annihilating most of the vile bloods, though Annalise herself survived through means both mysterious and eternal. Throughout all of this, Lawrence maintained his position as the first vicar of the healing church, the supreme authority in both spiritual and practical matters. But Lawrence himself was not immune to the very scourge his organization had unleashed. In the end, the founder of the healing church underwent the most complete and horrible transformation of all. Lawrence became the cleric beast, a massive burning monstrosity that embodied everything his church had tried to deny. His transformation was so catastrophic that it created a permanent wound in reality, his burning form trapped in a nightmare realm where it would rage eternally, a monument to failed ambitions and broken promises. The succession of vicars following Lawrence each tried in their own way to manage the crisis. Vicar Amelia, one of the last to hold the position, still clung desperately to the church's founding principles. Her prayer, spoken as she transforms before the player, reveals the desperation of the healing church in its final days, a plea for strength, for cleansing, for divine intervention to save them from the consequences of their own actions. But her transformation into a beast mid-prayer demonstrates the futility of such hopes. The church that had promised to elevate humanity had instead dragged it down into something worse than it had ever been. The healing church's structure also extended into bizarre experiments with human modification. The research hall, a secret facility connected to the church, became a site of grotesque procedures where patients were subjected to experimental treatments meant to grant them eyes on the inside. These subjects, initially volunteers seeking enlightenment, were surgically altered and exposed to substances meant to enhance their perception. The results were uniformly nightmarish. The patients' heads swelled grotesquely, filled with fluid and malformed tissue. Some grew additional sensory organs in random locations on their bodies. Many lost their sanity entirely, existing in states of permanent confusion and agony. Yet from the church's perspective, these experiments were successful, for some patients did report seeing things invisible to normal sight, experiencing visions of cosmic entities and alternate realities. The church's relationship with the common people of Yharnam evolved from benevolent authority to oppressive theocracy. The institution that had once offered hope and healing now demanded absolute obedience. Citizens were required to participate in blood ministration, with refusal treated as heresy. The church controlled access to the old blood, using it as both carrot and stick to maintain power. Those who questioned church doctrine found themselves labeled as beasts in human form, suitable targets for the hunters. The populace lived in constant fear, never knowing when the next beast night would occur, when the hunters would prowl the streets, seeking prey that might be beast or might be human. By the time of the game's events, the healing church has largely collapsed as a functional organization. The grand cathedral stands mostly empty, its halls echoing with the absence of the clergy who once filled them. The few church members who remain have either succumbed to the scourge themselves or retreated into isolated sanctuaries where they can pretend the outside world is not falling apart. The choir still operates beneath the cathedral, still communes with Ebrietas, still seeks the cosmic truth that has eluded them despite decades of research. But their numbers have dwindled, and their influence has waned. The school of Mensis achieved its goal of summoning Mergo, but the result was not the enlightenment they had sought. Instead, the ritual created the nightmare of Mensis, a hellish realm where reality itself buckled under the weight of cosmic interference. Mikolash and his followers became trapped in this nightmare, their physical bodies reduced to mummified corpses, while their consciousnesses wandered endlessly through a labyrinth of madness. The nightmare they created began to leak into the waking world, its influence driving more and more Yharnam citizens to insanity or transformation. The legacy of the healing church is written across every street of Yharnam. The citizens huddled behind locked doors, terrified of the night and what it might bring. The hunters prowling the streets, their sanity eroding with each kill, slowly becoming indistinguishable from the beasts they hunt. The abandoned districts where entire populations have transformed, where human civilization has been completely subsumed by bestial existence. And everywhere, the blood, the old blood that Lawrence believed would save humanity, but which instead became the instrument of its destruction. In the Grand Cathedral, a music box plays. It is a simple melody, one that Lawrence once gave to a young girl he cared for, a promise that he would return from his research and experiments. But Lawrence never did return, not as himself. The music box became a tool for hunters, capable of momentarily calming transformed beasts, reminding them of their lost humanity. It is a fitting symbol for the healing church as a whole, a beautiful promise that became nothing more than a way to briefly delay the inevitable, a moment's respite before the final transformation. The beast scourge is not simply a disease in any conventional medical sense. It is a fundamental corruption, a transformation that occurs on multiple levels simultaneously: physical, psychological, and spiritual. Understanding the scourge requires understanding the nature of blood itself in Bloodborne's world, for blood is not merely a biological substance, but something that carries memory, consciousness, and the potential for transcendence or damnation. The process of becoming a beast begins subtly, often before the afflicted individual realizes anything is wrong. The first symptoms are psychological rather than physical. A person who has undergone blood ministration may find themselves becoming more aggressive, quicker to anger, slower to reason. They develop cravings, particularly for meat, for blood itself. Sleep becomes difficult, plagued by nightmares of hunting and violence. These changes can be dismissed as stress, as the natural response to living in a city under siege by monsters. But they represent the first stage of transformation, the slow erosion of the qualities that make someone human. As the scourge progresses, physical changes manifest. The afflicted person grows taller, their frame elongating in unnatural ways. Their posture becomes hunched, their arms lengthening disproportionately to the rest of their body. Hair begins to grow in patches across their skin, coarse and dark, resistant to removal. Their teeth ache constantly, and when examined, one can see them lengthening, sharpening, becoming the fangs of a predator. The eyes change, too, the pupils dilating, the iris taking on an amber or reddish hue, reflecting light like an animal's eyes in darkness. The transformation feeds on itself, accelerating with each stage. The more bestial someone becomes physically, the more their behavior aligns with their changing form. They become violent, attacking others with increasing ferocity. They lose the ability to speak coherently, their words degrading into snarls and howls. Eventually, the person that once existed is completely subsumed by the beast they have become. Their memories fade, their personality dissolves, and what remains is purely predatory instinct, wrapped in a mockery of human form. Not all transformations follow the same path. The specific nature of someone's beast form appears to depend on multiple factors: the type and purity of blood they consumed, their own psychological state at the time of transformation, and perhaps some inherent affect of their nature that the scourge amplifies. Some become what are called scourge beasts, aggressive wolf-like creatures that retain some semblance of bipedal posture. Others transform into more complete beast forms, becoming indistinguishable from large predatory animals. Still others take on characteristics of specific animals, becoming beast patients with rat-like features, or blood-licking beasts with elongated, emaciated frames and an insatiable hunger for blood. The clergy of the healing church appear to transform into a specific variety of beast. When church officials succumb to the scourge, they become what are known as cleric beasts. Massive white-furred creatures with antler-like horns protruding from their skulls. These transformations are particularly violent and complete, perhaps because church members consumed more of the old blood than ordinary citizens, or perhaps because their devotion to the blood created a psychological condition that amplified the transformation. The cleric beast that guards the great bridge into Yharnam proper was once such an official, and its size and power demonstrate just how dangerous a transformed church member can become. Lawrence's own transformation into what would be called the cleric beast of the nightmare represents the ultimate expression of this pattern. As the first vicar, and the person most responsible for widespread blood ministration, Lawrence had consumed more old blood than anyone. His transformation was so catastrophic that it created a permanent scar on reality, his burning, bestial form trapped in an eternal nightmare where it rages without end. In a sense, Lawrence achieved the immortality he sought, but at the cost of everything that made that immortality worthwhile. The beast scourge is not random or chaotic in its spread. It follows patterns, intensifying during certain periods and in certain locations. The most dramatic of these patterns is the blood moon, a phenomenon where the night sky turns a deep crimson and the boundary between human and beast becomes paper-thin. During a blood moon, transformations accelerate dramatically. People who showed only minor symptoms may complete their change in hours. The already transformed beasts become more aggressive, gathering in larger numbers, coordinating their attacks in ways they normally do not. And perhaps most disturbing, during a blood moon, people begin to see things normally hidden from perception. The lesser great ones that inhabit Yharnam's streets, the amygdalas clinging to the sides of buildings, the cosmic horror that has always lurked just beyond ordinary sight. The blood moon appears to be triggered by specific events, particularly rituals performed by the school of Mensis. When Mensis successfully summoned Mergo, the act created a resonance that affected all of Yharnam. The veil that Rom, the vacuous spider, had created to hide the cosmic truth from the city's inhabitants was torn away. Suddenly, the citizens of Yharnam could see the great ones that had always been there, could perceive the true nature of their reality. This revelation itself drove many to madness or transformation, as the human mind is not equipped to process such cosmic truths without breaking. The relationship between blood and beasthood is complex and contradictory. The old blood grants strength and healing, but it also plants the seeds of transformation. The more blood someone consumes, the more powerful they become, but also the closer they edge toward losing their humanity. This creates a terrible dilemma for hunters in particular. To effectively hunt beasts, one must be strong, and strength comes from blood. But each blood vial consumed, each transfusion accepted, brings a hunter one step closer to becoming the very thing they hunt. Many famous hunters of Yharnam's history eventually succumbed to this fate, becoming blood-drunk and indistinguishable from beasts in their violence and savagery. Ludwig the Holy Blade represents perhaps the most tragic example of this pattern. Once the greatest of all hunters, a man whose faith in the righteousness of his cause never wavered, Ludwig eventually transformed into a hideous beast. His horse, which he had ridden into countless battles, merged with him in the transformation, creating a grotesque centaur-like monstrosity. Yet even in beast form, some fragment of Ludwig's consciousness persisted, and in his lucid moments he would recall his purpose, wielding his holy blade, even with claws and fangs. His transformation demonstrates that the beast scourge does not simply destroy the person, but twists them, turning their virtues into vehicles for horror. There are those who sought to resist the transformation through various means. Some citizens of Yharnam locked themselves away, refusing all blood ministration, hoping that abstinence would protect them. But the scourge had spread too far, contaminating the very air of Yharnam. Others turned to alternative blood sources, like the vile bloods of Cainhurst, who had developed their own rituals involving dregs, sediments found in blood that they believed could grant power without the transformative curse. Still others, like the members of the League, believed that crushing vermin, parasitic creatures visible only to those with specific insight, could prevent transformation. None of these methods proved reliably effective. The beast scourge also reveals something fundamental about the nature of humanity in Bloodborne's world. The transformation is not the introduction of something alien to human nature, but rather the unleashing of something that was always present. The beast exists within every person, a primal aspect of human psychology and biology that civilization and culture normally keep suppressed. The old blood does not create the beast, but rather removes the barriers that prevent its emergence. In this sense, the scourge is less an infection and more a revelation, showing what humans truly are beneath the veneer of civilization. This understanding is evident in the game's treatment of beasts as tragic figures rather than simple monsters. The citizens who transform are not evil, merely victims of forces they cannot control. The beasts that prowl Yharnam's streets were once people with families, dreams, and lives that mattered to someone. Their transformation does not erase their tragedy, but amplifies it. They are simultaneously victims, deserving of pity and threats that must be eliminated for the safety of those not yet transformed. This moral complexity is central to Bloodborne's themes, creating a world where there are no easy answers, no clear victories, only endless cycles of violence and transformation. The beast scourge also cannot be cured or reversed. Once someone has begun transforming, the process is irreversible. There is no medicine, no ritual, no intervention that can restore someone to their original human form. The best that can be hoped for is a swift death before the transformation completes, a mercy killing that preserves some dignity for the afflicted. This is the true horror of the scourge. Not that it kills, but that it transforms, creating a state worse than death, where the victim is trapped in a body and mind that are no longer their own. In the end, the beast scourge represents the ultimate price of Yharnam's hubris. The city sought to transcend human limitations through blood, to achieve a higher state of being through communion with cosmic entities. Instead, they achieved devolution, descending into a state more primitive and savage than any they could have imagined. The old blood that promised elevation delivered degradation. The miracle cure became the ultimate curse, and the city that had once been a beacon of healing became a charnel house where the line between hunter and hunted, between human and beast, dissolved entirely. When a person awakens in the hunter's dream for the first time, the experience is disorienting. They find themselves in a pleasant garden, surrounded by flowers and bathed in pale moonlight. A Victorian workshop sits nearby, filled with tools and weapons. Lanterns burn with a soft, steady light. The doll, a life-sized porcelain figure, greets them with gentle words and offers to help them grow stronger. At first glance, the hunter's dream seems to be a refuge, a safe haven from the nightmare of Yharnam's blood-soaked streets. But like everything in Bloodborne, the dream is not what it initially appears to be. It is both sanctuary and prison, both gift and curse. The origins of the hunter's dream lie in tragedy and terrible bargains. Following the massacre at the fishing hamlet, Gehrman, who had participated in that atrocity, found himself unable to continue as he had been. The guilt weighed upon him, the memories of what he had done and what he had witnessed haunting his every waking moment. He sought escape, sought purpose, sought some way to make amends for the sins he had committed in the name of research and progress. In his desperation, Gehrman made contact with a great one known as the Moon Presence, an entity that existed in the liminal space between dreams and reality. The moon presence had its own agenda, though what precisely it sought remains mysterious. Like all great ones, it yearned for a surrogate child, an heir to replace the offspring it had lost. But the moon presence also appeared to have an interest in containing the beast scourge, or at least in managing it through a specific means. It offered Gehrman a bargain, the creation of a realm outside normal time and space, a dream where hunters could be trained and equipped to combat the beasts. These hunters would be bound to the dream, able to return after death, effectively immortal within the context of the hunt. They would grow stronger with each death and rebirth, learning and adapting until they could face even the most terrible beasts without fear. The price for this dream was Gehrman himself. He would become the host of the dream, its permanent resident and caretaker. While hunters would come and go, living and dying and returning, Gehrman would remain trapped in the dream forever, or at least until someone could take his place. He accepted these terms, perhaps believing his eternal service would be a fitting punishment for his sins at the fishing hamlet, perhaps simply because he saw no other option. And so the hunter's dream was born, and Gehrman became the first hunter in a new sense, the first to be bound to the dream, the prototype for all hunters who would follow. The workshop in the hunter's dream is a replica of Gehrman's actual workshop in the waking world, the place where he had trained the first generation of hunters before the dream existed. Every tool, every weapon, every piece of furniture is precisely placed to match his memories. It is a nostalgic recreation, a frozen moment from a time before everything went wrong. But it is also hollow, a copy without substance, a reminder of what was lost rather than a true continuation of it. Central to the dream is the doll, a figure that moves and speaks despite being made of porcelain and cloth. The doll is not a simple automaton, but something more complex, possessing what appears to be genuine consciousness and emotion. Her origins lie with Lady Maria of Cainhurst, Gehrman's student, and, based on item descriptions that reference his curious mania, possibly the object of his unrequited affection. Gehrman had crafted the original doll in the waking world as a sort of memorial to Maria, a companion to ease his loneliness. But in the waking world, the doll remained inanimate, merely a lifeless sculpture. Only in the hunter's dream did she awaken, granted life through the power of the moon presence and the nature of the dream itself. The doll serves multiple purposes within the dream. She acts as a guide for hunters, explaining the basics of how the dream functions and how they can grow stronger. She channels the blood echoes that hunters collect from slain enemies, transforming that essence into tangible increases in strength, skill, and vitality. But beyond these mechanical functions, the doll also provides emotional support, offering words of encouragement and expressing what appears to be genuine care for the hunters who pass through the dream. Whether this care is truly her own or merely an echo of the personality Gehrman wished Maria had possessed remains ambiguous. Gehrman himself can be found sitting in the workshop, often sleeping, occasionally tending to the tools and weapons available to hunters. He appears as an elderly man confined to a wheelchair, though this apparent frailty is deceptive. When necessity demands it, Gehrman can move with the grace and speed of his youth, wielding his burial blade with the expertise of someone who has spent an eternity practicing the hunt. His dialogue reveals a deep weariness, a desire for release from his eternal servitude. He speaks of the dream as a surrogate, a comfort, but his tone suggests these are hollow reassurances he tells himself to make his imprisonment bearable. As hunters progress through their journey in Yharnam, they begin to understand the true nature of the dream. It is not separate from Yharnam's nightmare, but intimately connected to it. The dream exists because of the moon presence's will, maintained by Gehrman's imprisonment. When hunters die in Yharnam, they do not truly die, but are pulled back into the dream, their consciousness preserved even as their physical form dissipates. This makes hunters extraordinarily effective at their task, as they can learn from mistakes without the permanent consequence of death. But it also means they are trapped in an endless cycle, hunting and dying and hunting again, unable to break free unless specific conditions are met. The hunter's dream is also not the only dream realm in Bloodborne's cosmology. It exists alongside and in opposition to the hunter's nightmare, a hellish realm where blood-drunk hunters are imprisoned eternally. Where the hunter's dream is bathed in pale moonlight and offers peaceful moments between hunts, the hunter's nightmare is eternally aflame with an orange glow, a twisted landscape where hunters replay their sins and violence forever. These two realms represent different aspects of the hunt. The dream as the idealized version, the hunt as noble purpose, and the nightmare as the truth, the hunt as endless violence and bloodshed. The moon presence itself rarely appears directly, existing as a background force that influences events without overtly intervening. Its true form, when finally revealed, is both beautiful and horrible, an elongated, pale creature with membranous wings and a head dominated by a massive fanged maw. It moves with unnatural grace, defying gravity and normal physics. Its attacks include abilities that can reduce a hunter's health to a single point, demonstrating its power over life and death within the dream. The moon presence has been described as jealous, unwilling to allow hunters to form pacts with other great ones, aggressively defending its claim over those bound to the dream. The relationship between the moon presence and the other great ones, particularly Mergo and Odon, remains complex and adversarial. By compelling hunters to slay Mergo in the nightmare of Mensis, the moon presence seems to be eliminating a rival or preventing some outcome it finds undesirable. By binding hunters to its dream, it gains agents who can act in the physical world on its behalf. In essence, the moon presence uses the hunt as a tool to advance its own cosmic agenda, whatever that might be. Hunters believe they are saving Yharnam from the beast scourge, but they are also unknowing pawns in conflicts between entities whose true motives are beyond human comprehension. The hunter's dream can end in multiple ways, each representing a different outcome for the hunter and for the cycle of dreams and nightmares. In one ending, the hunter accepts Gehrman's mercy, allowing themselves to be killed by the first hunter. This severs their connection to the dream, allowing them to wake in Yharnam and live out whatever remains of their mortal life, though with no memory of the dream or the truth they uncovered. It is, in its way, a kindness, sparing the hunter from Gehrman's fate while allowing him to continue his vigil alone. In another ending, the hunter refuses Gehrman's offer and defeats him in combat. This breaks Gehrman's bond with the dream and allows him to finally die, his centuries of service concluded. But someone must host the dream for it to continue existing, and the moon presence appears to claim the victorious hunter as Gehrman's replacement. The hunter finds themselves in Gehrman's wheelchair, trapped in the same cycle of eternal servitude that had imprisoned their predecessor. They have freed Yharnam, but only by taking his place, perpetuating the cycle rather than breaking it. The third ending requires the hunter to have gained sufficient insight, to have consumed 3 1/3 umbilical cords and achieved a state of enhanced consciousness. When the moon presence attempts to claim such a hunter, they are able to resist its power. A battle ensues, and if the hunter prevails, they kill the moon presence itself. This act has profound consequences. The hunter begins to transform, not into a beast, but into something else entirely, an infant great one, a being of cosmic significance. The doll finds this newborn entity and cradles it gently, offering the same care she once gave to the hunters who passed through the dream. This ending suggests the ultimate goal of transcendence has been achieved, though whether this transformation represents victory or tragedy remains deliberately ambiguous. Each ending reflects different philosophies about the nature of the hunt and the pursuit of transcendence. The first represents acceptance of limitation, a return to mortal life and ordinary existence. The second represents the perpetuation of cycles, the passing of burdens from one generation to the next without true resolution. The third represents transformation and transcendence, the achievement of a higher state of being, though at the cost of humanity itself. None of these endings is clearly better than the others. Each represents a valid response to the cosmic horror and existential questions the game poses. The hunter's dream also serves a metatextual function, addressing the nature of video games themselves. The cycle of death and rebirth, of growing stronger through repeated attempts, of learning patterns and adapting strategies. These are fundamental to how players experience games. By making this mechanical reality part of the narrative, by giving diegetic explanation to the player's ability to respawn after death, Bloodborne creates a rare unity between gameplay and story. The player's experience of trying and failing, and trying again, mirrors the hunter's existence within the dream. The frustration of repeated deaths becomes part of the emotional journey, the eventual triumph more meaningful because of the struggle required to achieve it. The dream also represents the seductive nature of purpose and meaning, even when that meaning is constructed or imposed. Yharnam created hunters to fight beasts, giving them a clear enemy and a straightforward goal. This simplicity is appealing, especially compared to the complex moral ambiguities of the waking world. In the dream, one knows who the enemies are and what must be done. But this clarity is also a trap, preventing hunters from questioning whether the hunt itself might be perpetuating the very problems it claims to solve. The dream offers purpose at the cost of agency, strength at the cost of freedom. While the hunter's dream represents the idealized version of the hunter's nightmare embodies its terrible reality. This realm of torment exists as a direct consequence of the sins committed by the first hunters, particularly the atrocity at the fishing hamlet. Understanding the nightmare requires understanding what occurred in that distant coastal village and why those actions created a curse powerful enough to trap hunters across generations. The fishing hamlet was, by all accounts, an unremarkable settlement. Its inhabitants were simple people who made their living from the sea, casting nets and tending to their boats. Their lives changed irrevocably when the corpse of Kos washed ashore on their beach. Kos was a great one, though her relationship to the other cosmic entities remains unclear. Some theorize she was fleeing from something, others that she came deliberately to the hamlet for reasons unknowable. Regardless of why she arrived, her death or dying state represented a cataclysmic event for the villagers. Within Kos's body lived parasites, creatures that existed in symbiosis with the Great One. These organisms spread throughout the hamlet, infecting the villagers, but not in a destructive way. Rather, the parasites seemed to grant the villagers a connection to Kos herself, allowing them to perceive aspects of the cosmic reality that normally remained hidden. The villagers began to transform, developing aquatic characteristics. Gills appeared on their necks, their eyes took on a glassy, fish-like appearance, and some grew barnacles or other maritime growths on their skin. But these transformations were not painful or unwanted. The villagers seemed to embrace their changes, viewing them as gifts from the beached god they had discovered. This communion with the Great One's corpse granted the villagers what Byrgenwerth had spent years searching for: eyes on the inside, insight into the cosmic order, a direct connection to entities beyond human comprehension. When news of this reached Master Willem and his scholars, they organized an expedition immediately. Such an opportunity could not be ignored. Here was proof that communion with the Great Ones could be achieved, that the transcendence they sought was possible. They had to study these villagers, had to understand how their transformation had occurred, and whether it could be replicated. What should have been a research expedition became a massacre. The exact sequence of events remains obscured by time and the unreliable nature of nightmare memories, but the outcome is clear. The scholars, accompanied by hunters led by German, attacked the hamlet. They killed villagers indiscriminately, men, women, and children alike. They cut open the heads of the dead and dying, harvesting eyes they believed held the secret to cosmic perception. They violated Kos's corpse itself, cutting into the Great One's body to reach the orphan growing within her. This child, which had died before birth or perhaps during the assault, was taken from its mother's womb. Its umbilical cord, laden with cosmic power, was collected as a research specimen. The motivations for this violence remain debated. Some accounts suggest the scholars simply saw the villagers as research subjects, their lives less important than the knowledge that could be gained. Others propose that the villagers had become hostile, their transformation making them dangerous, and the massacre was a response to aggression rather than unprovoked assault. But the curse that followed suggests the former interpretation is more likely. If the villagers had truly been hostile monsters requiring elimination, their deaths would not have generated the spiritual weight necessary to create the hunter's nightmare. Among the hunters who participated in the massacre, Lady Maria of Cainhurst stands out as the most psychologically affected. Maria was Gehrman's prized student, a skilled warrior who wielded the rakuyo, an elegant split blade that could be used as one or two weapons depending on tactical need. She came from the noble bloodline of Cainhurst, granting her access to blood magic and techniques unavailable to common hunters. But her noble birth also gave her a code of honor that made the events at the fishing hamlet unbearable. Maria recognized the massacre for what it was: an unforgivable crime, a violation of innocent people for the sake of knowledge that perhaps should not be pursued. She tried to protect the villagers, or at least to minimize the violence, but ultimately participated in the atrocity. This failure haunted her for the rest of her life. Upon returning from the hamlet, Maria cast her rakuyo down a well in the fishing hamlet, symbolically abandoning the hunter's way. She renounced violence entirely, joining the research hall as a caretaker for the failed experimental subjects kept there. In caring for these victims of the Healing Church's experimentation, she perhaps sought some form of penance for what she had done to the villagers. But Maria could not escape the curse of the fishing hamlet. When she died, whether by her own hand or through other means, her consciousness did not find rest, but was pulled into the hunter's nightmare. There she became a guardian, standing watch before the astral clock tower that led to the fishing hamlet's nightmare reflection. She would not allow anyone to pass, would not permit others to witness the crime she and her fellow hunters had committed. Maria fought anyone who approached with a ferocity born of guilt and shame, wielding blood magic that set her own blood aflame, creating burning projectiles and explosive attacks that spoke to the depths of her self-loathing. Gehrman's response to the fishing hamlet was different from Maria's, but no less profound. Where Maria internalized her guilt and sought penance, Gehrman externalized his, attempting to create something good from the horror. His establishment of the hunter's dream can be understood as an attempt to redeem the hunter's way, to transform it from an instrument of unjust violence into a force for protecting humanity. But this redemption was impossible. The hunt itself was tainted by its origins in the fishing hamlet, and no amount of noble purpose could wash away that original sin. The fishing hamlet's revenge manifested as a curse that affected all hunters, not just those who had participated in the massacre. The dying villagers called out to Kos, pleading for the Great One to punish their murderers. And Kos, though her body was dead, heard these prayers from whatever cosmic realm her consciousness inhabited. The curse she laid upon hunters was elegant in its cruelty. Any hunter who became too consumed by bloodlust, who lost themselves to the violence and brutality of the hunt, would be drawn into the hunter's nightmare when they died. There, they would hunt eternally, trapped in a realm that embodied the worst aspects of the hunt, unable to rest or find peace. The hunter's nightmare itself reflects the geography and history of the hunt. Its first area is a twisted version of the cathedral ward and the path to the grand cathedral, perpetually burning with the orange flames that consumed old Yharnam. Beasts and hunters clash endlessly, neither side gaining permanent victory, the violence cycling perpetually. This section represents the failure of the healing church and its hunters to contain the beast scourge, the burning of old Yharnam made eternal. Deeper into the nightmare lies the research hall, a warped reflection of the facility where the healing church performed its most extreme experiments. The patients here are trapped in their own nightmares, experiencing endless variations of the procedures that granted them insight, but destroyed their minds and bodies. Some shamble about aimlessly, lost in delusions. Others are fixed in place, their bodies fused with the architecture. All suffer eternally, and their suffering is observed by Maria, who guards them still even in death. Beyond the research hall, at the end of the astral clock tower, lies the fishing hamlet itself, or rather the nightmare's version of it. This reflection of the coastal village exists in a permanent state of twilight, neither day nor night. The corpse of Kos lies on the beach, massive and decaying, but somehow still present. The villagers are there too, shambling corpses animated by the nightmare, reliving their deaths over and over. The entire hamlet is suffused with a profound sense of sorrow and rage, a psychic weight that presses down on anyone who enters. At the center of this nightmare version stands the orphan of Kos, the child that was taken from the Great One's womb. In the nightmare, the orphan has achieved a form of half-life, manifesting as a grotesque humanoid creature that wields its own placenta as a weapon. The orphan's cries echo across the hamlet, sounds of anguish and fury that never cease. It attacks anyone who approaches with savage intensity, as if trying to kill its mother's murderers over and over, as if no amount of violence could satisfy its need for revenge. Defeating the orphan does not kill it, not truly, for it was never truly alive in any conventional sense. But it does release the entity from its cursed state, allowing it to ascend into the sky where it transforms into a glowing presence that bathes the hamlet in soft light. With the orphan released, the curse of Kos begins to lift. The hunter's nightmare, while not destroyed, loses much of its power. Hunters trapped there may finally find rest, released from their eternal torment. This resolution is bittersweet. The hunters who participated in the massacre cannot be forgiven, cannot undo what they did. The villagers of the fishing hamlet cannot be brought back to life. But the cycle of vengeance can be broken. The curse that had perpetuated across generations finally laid to rest. It represents one of the few truly hopeful elements in Bloodborne's narrative. The possibility that even the most grievous sins can have consequences that eventually end, that wounds can heal, even if scars remain forever. Simon the Harrowed represents another perspective on the fishing hamlet and its secrets. This enigmatic hunter appears throughout the hunter's nightmare, offering cryptic guidance and warnings. Simon has dedicated himself to uncovering the truth about the first hunters and their crimes, believing that knowledge of these events is necessary to understand the current state of Yharnam and the hunt. He seeks to expose the Church's lies, to reveal that the noble hunters of legend began as murderers and thieves who violated cosmic entities for the sake of forbidden knowledge. Simon's quest is doomed from the start. Even if he uncovers the complete truth, even if he can prove what happened at the fishing hamlet, who would listen? Yharnam is too far gone, too consumed by the beast scourge and the machinations of the Great Ones. The revelation that the city's problems stem from ancient sins would not change anything, would not cure the beasts or restore the dead to life. Yet Simon pursues his investigation anyway, driven by a need for truth, even when truth offers no practical benefit. In this, he embodies one of Bloodborne's central themes, the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, regardless of cost or consequence. The fishing hamlet also connects to Ludwig's story, though the exact nature of this connection remains mysterious. Ludwig encountered something he called the Moonlight Sword, a weapon of pure energy that he claimed spoke to him and gave him guidance. This sword, which appears throughout the Souls series as an iconic weapon, takes on new significance in Bloodborne. It represents not merely a powerful armament, but a connection to cosmic entities, possibly to Kos herself, or to the insight gained from the hamlet's massacre. Ludwig's faith in his sword sustained him through countless battles, but ultimately could not prevent his transformation into a beast. The sword that had once guided him was eventually lost, and when reunited with it in the nightmare, Ludwig experiences a moment of clarity, remembering his purpose before succumbing once more to madness. The old hunters, as they came to be known collectively, represent a lost golden age of the hunt that never truly existed. They are remembered as heroes, as legendary warriors who protected Yharnam from the beast scourge through skill and courage. But the reality, revealed in the nightmare, is far darker. The old hunters were violent, brutal, often indistinguishable from the beasts they hunted. They killed indiscriminately, committed atrocities in the name of research and progress, and ultimately became the very monsters they had sworn to eliminate. The nightmare traps them in this reality, forcing them to confront what they truly were, rather than what history remembers them as being. This gap between legend and reality is deliberately emphasized throughout the nightmare. Players encounter famous hunters as nightmarish bosses, Ludwig as a grotesque horse-beast hybrid, Maria as a blood-mad guardian who sets her own vitae aflame, Lawrence as the burning cleric beast his transformation created. These are not the heroes of stories, but the truth behind those stories, the rot beneath the gilded surface. By confronting and defeating these figures, the player character is not destroying legends, but rather acknowledging reality, stripping away the comforting lies that Yharnam told itself about its past. The hunter's nightmare also serves as a warning about what happens when the hunt becomes an end unto itself, rather than a means to an end. Hunters enter the profession to protect people, to eliminate threats, to make the world safer. But the act of hunting is seductive. The adrenaline of combat, the satisfaction of a successful kill, the constant increase in power and skill, these can become addictive. A hunter can forget why they started hunting and simply continue because it is all they know how to do. This is what it means to become blood drunk, to hunt not out of necessity, but out of compulsion, to kill not because targets are threats, but because killing has become the only thing that makes sense. The nightmare is filled with such blood-drunk hunters, warriors who have completely lost themselves to the violence of the hunt. They attack each other as readily as they attack beasts, unable to distinguish friend from foe, ally from enemy. They exist in a state of perpetual rage and bloodlust, their humanity completely subsumed by the hunt itself. This is the ultimate fate that awaits all hunters who do not find a way to stop, to step back, to remember that they are more than just killers. It is a fate that the player character is constantly in danger of succumbing to, making every choice to show mercy or restraint significant. The fishing hamlet sequence in the DLC also introduces one of Bloodborne's most unsettling enemy types, the Winter Lanterns. These creatures appear as humanoid figures, covered in writhing messenger corpses, singing an eerie lullaby that causes rapid build-up of frenzy in anyone who looks at them. The Winter Lanterns seem to be manifestations of the hamlet's curse, creatures born from the trauma and horror of what occurred there. Their song might be the lullaby that Kos sang to her orphan, now twisted into something that drives listeners mad. Their presence suggests that some wounds run so deep that they fundamentally alter the nature of reality, creating entities that embody suffering itself. The resolution of the fishing hamlet's storyline does not undo the harm that was done. The villagers remain dead, Kos remains deceased, and the hunters who committed the atrocity cannot be brought to justice in any conventional sense. But by confronting the orphan and releasing it from its cursed state, by acknowledging the crime rather than hiding from it, a form of closure becomes possible. The curse loses its power not because it has been defeated, but because it has been witnessed, acknowledged, and ultimately accepted as a fundamental part of the hunt's history. This is as close to redemption as Bloodborne's world allows, not forgiveness or absolution, but honest acknowledgement of harm done and the willingness to bear the weight of that knowledge. At the heart of Bloodborne's narrative lies a concept that is simultaneously mechanical, thematic, and philosophical. Insight represents the game's currency for certain transactions, but it also represents something far more profound: the gradual accumulation of cosmic knowledge, the process of seeing beyond ordinary reality into the truths that underlie existence. As players accumulate insight, the game world itself changes, revealing aspects that were always present but remained invisible to ignorant eyes. This mechanic beautifully illustrates one of the game's central questions: is enlightenment worth the cost of sanity? The philosophy of insight originates with Master Willem and his scholars at Byrgenwerth. Willem recognized that humanity stood at an impasse. The human mind, shaped by evolution to survive on Earth, was fundamentally limited in what it could comprehend. Certain truths about the universe, certain aspects of reality, simply could not be processed by ordinary human consciousness. This limitation was not merely frustrating, but potentially catastrophic, as it meant humanity was surrounded by forces and entities it could neither perceive nor understand, vulnerable to threats it could not see coming. Willem's solution was radical. If the human mind could not expand through conventional thought, perhaps it could expand through literally adding new organs of perception. He spoke of lining one's brain with eyes, of developing sight that looked inward rather than outward. This was not metaphorical, but literal. Willem believed that through certain rituals, exposure to specific substances, and contact with cosmic entities, humans could develop actual eyes within their brains, organs that could perceive dimensions and truths invisible to physical eyes. The concept sounds absurd when stated plainly, but within Bloodborne's reality, it has disturbing validity. The Great Ones themselves possess multiple eyes scattered across their bodies in configurations that defy natural evolution. These eyes seem to see in ways fundamentally different from human sight, perceiving time, space, and probability as dimensions to be navigated rather than immutable facts. By developing similar organs, humans might achieve similar perception, might transcend their limited perspective, and understand the cosmos as the Great Ones do. But this pursuit comes with severe costs. The human brain is not designed to process the information that such eyes would provide. Cosmic truth is not merely complex, but fundamentally incompatible with human psychology. To perceive reality as it truly is, without the comfortable filters and simplifications that normal consciousness provides, is to invite madness. The more one understands about the true nature of existence, the less one fits into ordinary human society and experience. This is demonstrated through multiple characters who have pursued insight to its furthest extremes. Master Willem himself serves as the primary example. In his youth, he was a brilliant scholar, capable of complex reasoning and elegant communication. But as he accumulated insight over decades of research and communion with cosmic entities, his ability to function in human terms deteriorated. By the time players encounter him, Willem appears as an ancient figure who can barely speak, capable of producing only a single word: Byrgenwerth. His mind has expanded so far beyond human parameters that normal thought and speech have become impossible. He has achieved the transcendence he sought, but in doing so, has ceased to be recognizably human. The patients of the research hall demonstrate another aspect of forced insight. These individuals volunteered or were volunteered for experiments designed to grant them eyes on the inside through surgical and alchemical means. The results are uniformly horrifying. Their heads swelled with fluid and malformed tissue, their bodies covered in strange growths, their minds fractured by perceptions they could not integrate into coherent experience. They see things invisible to others, creatures lurking in shadows, geometric patterns underlying reality, the flow of time as a visible river. But these perceptions bring no peace or understanding, only confusion and suffering. One patient in particular stands out. Adeline, a former blood saint of the healing church. She consumed so much brain fluid, a substance derived from the slug-like creatures that represent failed attempts at gaining insight, that her body began producing it naturally. This should have granted her profound cosmic understanding, but instead left her trapped between ordinary consciousness and something beyond it, experiencing neither fully and suffering from the disconnect. Her dialogue reveals the tragedy of half-successful ascension. She sees enough to know that ordinary human experience is limited and false, but not enough to transcend it completely. The game itself demonstrates the effects of insight through its mechanics. As players accumulate insight points, the world literally changes around them. New enemies appear that were always present, but invisible to those with low insight. Amygdalas clinging to buildings, mad ones manifesting in boss arenas, winter lanterns appearing in previously safe areas. Existing enemies gain new attacks and behaviors as if responding to the player's heightened perception. The music in certain areas shifts subtly, adding layers of sound that suggest cosmic presences lurking just beyond ordinary awareness. This mechanic creates a fascinating tension. Insight is valuable, necessary for purchasing certain items and accessing specific content. But accumulating too much insight makes the game actively more difficult and dangerous. It is a perfect mechanical representation of the thematic content. Knowledge has value, but pursuing it too far brings only suffering and peril. Players must constantly balance the benefits of insight against its costs, deciding how much they are willing to see, how much truth they can handle. The concept of eyes on the inside also connects to the umbilical cords scattered throughout the game. These cords, severed from stillborn or unborn Great One children, are described as granting eyes on the inside when consumed. Collecting and using 3 cords represents the player character achieving a level of insight comparable to that of the Great Ones themselves, enough to resist the Moon Presence's attempt to bind them, and potentially enough to transform into an infant Great One. This transformation in the game's third ending represents the ultimate expression of the insight philosophy. The player character does not simply accumulate knowledge, but undergoes a fundamental change in their nature, becoming something beyond human. They achieve the transcendence that Willem and Lawrence both sought through different means. But the game deliberately leaves ambiguous whether this transformation represents victory or tragedy. Has the player character evolved into a higher form of life, or have they simply ceased to be human? The doll cradles the infant Great One gently, but we do not know what this new existence entails, whether it brings happiness or suffering, enlightenment, or merely a different form of imprisonment. The Great Ones themselves demonstrate that insight and understanding do not necessarily bring wisdom or contentment. Despite their cosmic perspective and vast power, the Great Ones are characterized primarily by loss and yearning. They have lost their children and desperately seek surrogates. They intervene in human affairs not from positions of omniscient superiority, but from what appears to be need or desire. They can perceive dimensions invisible to humans, can manipulate reality in ways that seem like magic, yet they suffer from very human emotions: grief, loneliness, perhaps even fear. This suggests that insight does not resolve the fundamental challenges of existence, but merely reframes them. A human worries about death, disease, and loss. A Great One, having transcended these concerns, instead worries about the loss of children, about the incomprehensible vastness of existence, about needs that humans cannot even name. The pursuit of insight promises escape from human limitation, But what it delivers is merely a different set of limitations, cosmic in scale, perhaps, but no less constraining. The choir's communion with Ebrietas demonstrates this dynamic. They have achieved what Byrgenwerth could not: direct, sustained contact with a Great One that tolerates their presence. They have learned cosmic secrets, developed powerful arcane abilities, glimpsed truths that other humans cannot comprehend. Yet what have they accomplished with this knowledge? Yharnam still suffers from the beast scourge. The healing church still perpetuates harmful practices. The choir itself consists of relatively few members, isolated in their underground sanctuary, increasingly divorced from the human concerns they ostensibly serve. Their insight has given them power, but not wisdom, knowledge, but not understanding of how to apply it beneficially. Mikuláš and the school of Mensis represent the most aggressive pursuit of insight, attempting to forcibly contact Mergo and achieve communion with the formless Great One. Their ritual succeeded in a technical sense, creating a connection to Mergo's consciousness. But this success trapped Mikuláš and his followers in a nightmare realm where they wander eternally, their physical bodies reduced to mummified corpses, while their minds experience endless variations of madness and revelation. Mikuláš's dialogue reveals someone who has achieved the insight he sought, but finds it simultaneously glorious and torturous, trapped in a state where he cannot stop perceiving cosmic truth, even as it drives him further from sanity. The game's treatment of insight also serves as commentary on knowledge and curiosity more broadly. Humans are naturally curious creatures, driven to understand the world around them. This curiosity has produced art, science, philosophy, and all the achievements of civilization. But curiosity without wisdom, knowledge without ethical grounding, understanding without compassion, these can lead to atrocity. The scholars of Byrgenwerth were curious about the fishing hamlet, but their curiosity led to massacre. The healing church sought knowledge of the old blood, but their pursuit created the beast scourge. Mensis wanted to commune with Mergo, but their ritual created a nightmare that infected all of Yharnam. Bloodborne suggests that some knowledge might not be worth pursuing, that some truths are fundamentally harmful to those who learn them. This is not an argument for ignorance or anti-intellectualism, but rather a recognition that knowledge exists in context. Understanding must be tempered by ethics, curiosity balanced by caution, and the pursuit of truth grounded in awareness of potential consequences. The game's world demonstrates what happens when these balances are lost, when the pursuit of knowledge becomes an end unto itself regardless of cost. Yet the game does not simply condemn insight and curiosity. The player character's journey requires accumulating insight, and the true ending can only be accessed by those who have consumed 3 umbilical cords and achieved maximum cosmic understanding. The game suggests that insight, despite its dangers, might be necessary for breaking the cycles that trap Yharnam. Only by understanding the full truth of the situation, the Great Ones, the Hunter's dream, the Beast Scourge's origins, can one hope to change anything. Ignorance might be comfortable, but it is also complicity in existing systems of oppression and harm. This creates the game's central tension. Insight is dangerous but necessary, destructive but potentially liberating. The optimal path is not to reject it entirely, but to pursue it carefully, with full awareness of the costs involved. This is why the game presents multiple endings rather than a single, correct solution. Different players will reach different conclusions about whether the pursuit of insight was worth it, whether transcendence represents evolution or loss, whether understanding the truth justifies the suffering required to achieve it. The history of Yharnam and the hunt is written not just in grand events and cosmic revelations, but in the personal stories of individuals who shaped and were shaped by these forces. Each major figure in Bloodborne represents a different response to the challenges posed by the Old Blood, the Great Ones, and the Beast Scourge. By examining their fates, we can understand the full spectrum of possibilities within this nightmarish world. Gehrman, the first hunter, began as a craftsman and warrior, someone who saw the early signs of the Beast Scourge and dedicated himself to combating it. He trained the first generation of hunters, developing techniques and weapons specifically designed to combat transformed humans. His workshop became the center of the hunter's way, a place where knowledge and equipment were shared, where the desperate could learn to defend themselves and others. Gehrman was respected, even revered, as someone who stood against the darkness when others fled. But Gehrman's participation in the fishing hamlet massacre shattered his sense of purpose. He could not reconcile what he had done with his self-image as a protector. The guilt consumed him, driving him to seek some form of penance or redemption. His bargain with the Moon Presence seemed to offer this. He would create a realm where hunters could fight eternally against the beasts, where death was not the end, but merely a temporary setback. In his mind, perhaps he imagined countless hunters flowing through the dream, gradually pushing back the scourge until Yharnam was saved. The reality was far lonelier. Gehrman became trapped in the dream, experiencing time differently from the waking world, waiting through what must have felt like an eternity for each new hunter to arrive. He watched them struggle and return, knowing that most would eventually fall to the same blood-drunk madness that claimed so many before them. The dream that should have been his redemption became his prison, and the hunters he trained became perpetuators of violence as much as defenders against it. By the time players encounter him, Gehrman is exhausted, desperate for release, begging newcomers to accept his mercy-killing rather than continue the cycle. Lady Maria's response to the fishing hamlet was different but equally tragic. Where Gehrman sought redemption through creating the hunter's dream, Maria sought it through renunciation and care. She abandoned violence entirely, taking up residence in the research hall where she could care for the victims of the church's experiments. This was not glamorous work. The patients were often incoherent, sometimes violent, their suffering beyond Maria's ability to alleviate. But she remained with them, perhaps seeing in their broken minds and bodies a reflection of the broken villagers she had helped murder. Maria's death, whether by suicide or other means, should have been an escape from her guilt. Instead, it trapped her in the hunter's nightmare, where she became a guardian, preventing others from reaching the fishing hamlet. In this role, she perpetuated the very secrecy that had allowed the massacre to occur, ensuring that the truth remained hidden. Yet she had no choice. The nightmare compelled her to this guardianship, making her simultaneously victim and perpetrator of concealment. Her boss fight is notable for its sadness as much as its intensity. This is not a warrior who relishes combat, but someone going through the motions of violence out of compulsion and despair. Lawrence, the first vicar of the Healing Church, represents ambition untempered by caution. He believed that Willem's fears about the old blood were excessive, that the potential benefits far outweighed the risks. He founded an institution dedicated to using blood ministration to heal the sick and transform Yharnam into a paradise. For a time, he seemed vindicated. The church grew powerful, the sick were cured, and Yharnam flourished. Lawrence himself became one of the most influential figures in the city, his word carrying the weight of both spiritual and temporal authority. But Lawrence was not immune to the scourge he had helped spread. Despite his position, despite access to the purest blood available, despite every precaution the church could devise, Lawrence transformed. His change was not gradual, but catastrophic, his body warping into a massive cleric beast that embodied the denial and hubris that had characterized his approach to the blood. The transformation was so violent, so suffused with fire and rage, that it created a permanent scar in reality, trapping Lawrence's burning form in the hunter's nightmare, where it would rage eternally. In the nightmare, Lawrence retains enough consciousness to experience his transformation, to understand what he has become and what his choices have led to. This awareness makes his fate particularly cruel. He is not simply a beast acting on instinct, but a self-aware entity trapped in a bestial form, experiencing endless rage and pain while remembering being human. His skull, found in the waking world by the player, serves as a final link to his humanity, a relic of what he was before ambition and the old blood consumed him completely. Master Willem chose a different path from his former student, pursuing insight through contemplation rather than through blood. He and his remaining followers at Byrgenwerth wore blindfolds, attempting to block out earthly sight and develop the inner vision he believed was necessary for transcendence. Willem made contact with Rom, his former student, who through ritual or divine intervention had transformed into the vacuous spider. He recognized that Rom had achieved a form of ascension, becoming something beyond human, and he sought to understand and potentially replicate this transformation. But Willem's pursuit of insight came with its own costs. His communion with cosmic entities changed him physiologically, his skull swelling with something not entirely organic, his blood turning a silvery color distinct from both human and old blood. His mental faculties, once so sharp, deteriorated as his consciousness expanded beyond human parameters. By the time players encounter him, Willem sits motionless on a balcony overlooking the moonlit lake, barely responding to external stimuli, lost in contemplation of truths that have consumed his sanity. He achieved the transcendence he sought, but like so many others, discovered that transcendence and happiness are not synonymous. Ludwig the Holy Blade represents the tragedy of faith and idealism. He believed wholeheartedly in the righteousness of the hunt, in the nobility of the hunter's calling, in the possibility of protecting people through strength and courage. He transformed the church hunters from individual warriors into a coordinated force, inspired them with speeches and personal example, and led them into battle against beasts with absolute confidence in their cause. His holy blade, which could transform from sword to greatsword, became iconic, a symbol of the church's power and the hunter's dedication. Ludwig's faith was rewarded with transformation. Despite his strength, despite his skill, despite his unwavering belief in his cause, Ludwig eventually succumbed to the beast scourge. His transformation was particularly grotesque. He merged with his horse, becoming a nightmarish, centaur-like creature that combined the worst aspects of both man and beast. In this form, he was trapped in the hunter's nightmare, attacking anyone who approached with savage violence, but occasionally experiencing moments of lucidity where he remembered his purpose. What makes Ludwig's story particularly poignant is that even in beast form, even after everything that happened, he clings to his faith. When reunited with his holy blade in the nightmare, he experiences a moment of clarity, remembering who he was and what he believed. The sword speaks to him, or he believes it does, offering guidance and comfort. Whether this is genuine communion with something divine, or merely Ludwig's fractured mind, creating the comfort it desperately needs, remains deliberately ambiguous. But for Ludwig, the distinction does not matter. His faith sustains him even in hell, perhaps the only thing that can. Vicar Amelia represents the healing church in its final days, a young woman thrust into leadership of an institution that was already crumbling. She inherited the position of vicar at a time when the beast scourge was intensifying, when the church's legitimacy was in question, when the very foundations of Yharnam society were collapsing. She tried to maintain the church's traditions, conducting services, offering prayers, desperately clinging to the belief that devotion and faith could somehow reverse the tide of catastrophe. Amelia's transformation occurs mid-prayer, a brutal demonstration that faith alone cannot protect against the scourge. She becomes a white-furred cleric beast, joining the long line of church officials who met similar fates. The pendant she clutches even in beast form suggests some fragment of awareness remains, some desperate hope that salvation might still be possible. But there is no salvation, only transformation, only the inevitable conclusion of the path the church had set Yharnam upon decades earlier. Mikuláš, host of the nightmare, represents the most extreme pursuit of insight through force rather than contemplation. He and his school of mensis performed a grand ritual designed to make contact with Mergo, the stillborn infant Great One of Queen Yharnam. The ritual required tremendous preparation, the construction of a massive brain-like entity called the Brain of Mensis, the sacrifice or transformation of numerous subjects, and the creation of resonance sufficient to pierce the veil between realities. The ritual succeeded, creating a connection to Mergo and establishing what became known as the Nightmare of Mensis. But this success trapped Mikuláš and his followers in the nightmare they had created. Their physical bodies died or were reduced to mummified husks, their consciousness now permanently existing in the nightmare realm, where they experience endless variations of contact with cosmic entities. Mikuláš himself appears as a hostile presence, fleeing through endless corridors while spouting fragments of cosmic wisdom mixed with evident madness. He speaks of eyes, of insight, of the privilege of communing with great ones, but his tone wavers between ecstasy and agony, suggesting that what he has achieved is both everything he wanted and more than he can bear. The fate of these key figures illustrates that in Bloodborne's world, there are no safe choices, no guaranteed paths to success or happiness. Gehrman's attempt at redemption became eternal imprisonment. Maria's renunciation of violence could not free her from her past. Lawrence's ambition led to catastrophic transformation. Willem's cautious pursuit of insight still resulted in the loss of his humanity. Ludwig's faith sustained him through nightmares, but could not prevent those nightmares from occurring. Amelia's devotion provided no protection against the scourge. Mikuláš's success in contacting cosmic entities brought madness rather than enlightenment. Each figure made choices that seemed reasonable given their knowledge and circumstances. Each believed they were pursuing something worthwhile: protection, knowledge, healing, transcendence, redemption. Yet all ended in tragedy, their fates serving as warnings about the dangers inherent in the paths they chose. The game suggests that perhaps in a world infected by the old blood and haunted by great ones, tragedy is inevitable regardless of the choices made. The question becomes not how to avoid tragedy, but how to face it with dignity, how to maintain some core of identity and purpose even as the world crumbles and transforms around you. Bloodborne's cosmology includes multiple layers of reality, each with its own rules and characteristics. The waking world of Yharnam is merely the most mundane of these layers, the surface reality where ordinary humans live and die. Beneath and beyond it lie numerous nightmare realms, dream spaces, and cosmic planes that intersect with the physical world in complex ways. Understanding these layers is crucial to understanding the full scope of what transpires in the game. The hunter's dream, as discussed earlier, represents a sanctuary created through the bargain between Gehrman and the Moon Presence. It exists outside normal time, allowing hunters to return after death and continue their work indefinitely. The dream appears as a pleasant garden surrounding a workshop, bathed in pale moonlight that never changes regardless of how much time passes. Messengers, small imp-like creatures that seem to exist as intermediaries between realities, populate the dream, offering their services to hunters by holding items and providing access to equipment. The dream is stable and relatively safe, a fixed point that hunters can always return to. But this stability is artificial, maintained by the Moon Presence's power and Gehrman's imprisonment. The dream can change, expanding to include new areas or revealing previously hidden spaces, but these changes occur at the will of the entities that control it, rather than through natural evolution. In this sense, the dream is more akin to a constructed environment than an organic realm. In stark contrast stands the hunter's nightmare, a hellish realm that embodies the true nature of the hunt stripped of all pretense and idealization. Where the dream is peaceful and orderly, the nightmare is chaotic and violent. It exists in a state of permanent twilight, illuminated by an orange glow that evokes the fires that consumed old Yharnam. Hunters and beasts clash endlessly, neither side capable of final victory, both trapped in cycles of violence that serve no purpose beyond perpetuating themselves. The hunter's nightmare is not a single unified space, but rather a collection of connected nightmare zones, each representing different aspects of Yharnam's history and the hunt's corruption. The first area mirrors the cathedral ward and the path to the Grand Cathedral, showing what these locations would look like if the beast scourge had completely overwhelmed them. The research hall represents the healing church's experiments in forced ascension, filled with the victims of procedures designed to grant eyes on the inside. The astral clock tower serves as a threshold, guarded by Lady Maria, between the relatively comprehensible nightmares and the more abstract horror of the fishing hamlet. The fishing hamlet exists in its own unique nightmare state, a reflection of the coastal village where the massacre occurred. This nightmare version of the hamlet is suffused with the curse of course, perpetually reliving the moments of its destruction while simultaneously existing in a timeless state where nothing truly progresses. The orphan of Kos manifests here, an entity that should not be alive, but persists through the power of its mother's curse and the guilt of those who violated the hamlet. Separate from but connected to these realms is the nightmare of Mensis, created by the school of Mensis's ritual to contact Mergo. This nightmare is more abstract than the hunter's nightmare, featuring architecture that defies normal geometry and spatial relationships that make no logical sense. Staircases lead to impossible destinations. Rooms connect in ways that violate three-dimensional space, and perspective itself seems uncertain. The nightmare of Mensis reflects the minds of those who created it, filled with obsessive pursuit of cosmic knowledge and the madness that such pursuit inevitably brings. At the heart of the nightmare of Mensis lies Mergo's loft, where the consciousness of the stillborn Great One resides. Mergo has no physical form, but exists as pure presence, manifested through the sound of crying that echoes throughout the area. The crying is simultaneously that of an infant and something far older and more alien, a sound that conveys loss and loneliness that transcends human emotion. Wet nurses, massive entities with multiple arms and covered in what appear to be dripping eyes or wounds, serve as Mergo's guardians, protecting the formless consciousness from intruders. These nightmare realms are not completely separate from the waking world, but rather exist in parallel, occasionally bleeding through when conditions are right. During the blood moon, this bleeding intensifies dramatically. The amygdalas that normally remain invisible become perceptible even to those with low insight. Creatures from nightmare realms manifest in Yharnam streets. The boundary between dream and reality becomes permeable, allowing influence to flow in both directions. This permeability raises questions about the nature of reality itself in Bloodborne's cosmology. If nightmares can affect the waking world, if dream realms grant tangible benefits like the hunter's dream does, if consciousness can persist in nightmare form after physical death, then what distinguishes real from unreal? The game suggests that this distinction might be less clear than we typically assume, that reality exists on a spectrum rather than as a binary state. Rom, the vacuous spider, plays a crucial role in managing these boundaries. Rom appears to serve as a living barrier or filter, creating an illusion that hides the true cosmic horror lurking in and around Yharnam. While Rom lives, ordinary citizens cannot perceive the Great Ones clinging to buildings, cannot see the nightmare entities that prowl the streets, cannot fully comprehend the extent to which their reality has been compromised by cosmic interference. Rom's presence maintains a collective delusion that allows normal life to continue, however tenuously. When Rom is killed, this barrier shatters. The blood moon rises, turning the night sky crimson and revealing what had always been hidden. Citizens who were going about their lives suddenly find themselves surrounded by horrors they cannot process. Many go mad immediately, their minds breaking under the weight of cosmic truth. Others transform, the revelation acting as a catalyst that accelerates their latent beast scourge. The city that seemed relatively stable, if dangerous, is revealed to be a nightmare that was merely wearing the disguise of normality. Rom's role as barrier keeper raises interesting questions about the nature of her ascension. Was she a willing sacrifice, choosing to transform herself into a living veil that would protect humanity from truths it couldn't handle? Or was this role imposed upon her by Byrgenwerth scholars or the Great Ones themselves, who recognized that ordinary people couldn't survive perceiving cosmic reality? The fact that she is called vacuous suggests a certain emptiness, as if the consciousness that once belonged to a human woman has been hollowed out to serve as a cosmic filter. In director Hidetaka Miyazaki's own words, Rom is female, a former scholar of Byrgenwerth who underwent transformation. This interpretation makes Rom's existence tragic. She achieved the transcendence that Byrgenwerth sought, but at the cost of everything that made her an individual, transformed into a living tool that maintains reality's fragile barrier. The nightmare realms also serve as prisons for those who have transgressed against cosmic entities or violated fundamental rules of reality. The hunter's nightmare traps blood-drunk hunters. The fishing hamlet nightmare imprisons those cursed by Kos, and the nightmare of Mensis contains those who forced contact with Great Ones. These are not deliberate constructions in most cases, but rather natural consequences, reality itself responding to violations by creating spaces where the violators experience eternal consequences for their actions. Yet these nightmares are not entirely punitive. The hunter's nightmare also serves as a warning, showing future hunters what fate awaits them if they lose themselves to bloodlust. The fishing hamlet nightmare preserves the memory of what occurred there, ensuring that the crime cannot be completely forgotten, even if it can be hidden from most people. The nightmare of Mensis demonstrates the price of forcing communion with cosmic entities, a lesson that future scholars might learn from if they could access it safely. The existence of multiple nightmare realms also suggests that similar spaces might exist for other transgressions or significant events. The game shows us only a few nightmares, but the cosmology implies many others might exist, each reflecting different aspects of Yharnam's history or different violations of cosmic law. Some might be ancient, predating the city itself, while others might be forming even now as new sins are committed and new curses are born. The relationship between these realms and the Great Ones remains complex and not entirely clear. The Great Ones exist across multiple planes of reality simultaneously, their consciousness not bound to a single layer of existence. They can manifest in the waking world, influence dreams, and shape nightmares according to their will or nature. Some Great Ones, like Ebrietas, choose to remain primarily in the physical realm. Others, like Mergo, exist almost entirely in nightmare space. Still others, like the Moon Presence, seem to inhabit a threshold between multiple realities, able to move between them with ease. The messengers that appear throughout these realms serve as a connecting thread, suggesting that despite their apparent separation, all these layers of reality are interconnected. Messengers can carry items between the waking world and the hunter's dream, can deliver messages from one realm to another, and seem to exist comfortably in spaces where normal humans would go mad. Their true nature remains mysterious, but they appear to be entities that exist fundamentally across multiple realities rather than being native to any single one. The dream realms also respond to belief and perception in ways the physical world does not. In the hunter's dream, the doll remains inanimate until the hunter gains a single point of insight, at which point she awakens and begins moving and speaking. This suggests that the dream responds to the observer's consciousness, revealing or hiding aspects depending on their level of awareness. Similarly, the nightmares seem to intensify or become more detailed as one progresses through them, as if they are constructing themselves in response to being observed and explored. This responsive quality of dream and nightmare realms makes them simultaneously more and less real than the physical world. They are less constrained by natural laws, able to reshape themselves according to narrative or thematic logic rather than physical causation. But they are also more dependent on consciousness, requiring observers or participants to maintain their existence. An empty nightmare might collapse or fade, while a nightmare with multiple trapped consciousnesses would remain stable and persistent. The implications of this cosmology are profound. If reality exists in layers, if consciousness can persist across multiple planes, if nightmares can trap souls for eternity, then death is not the end of existence but merely a transition. This should be comforting, suggesting some form of immortality or at least persistence beyond physical death. But Bloodborne makes clear that existence beyond death is not necessarily preferable to oblivion. The hunters trapped in the hunter's nightmare, the scholars lost in the nightmare of Mensis, the victims of the fishing hamlet curse, all would likely prefer true death to their nightmare existence. This creates another layer of tragedy in the game's world. Even death offers no guaranteed escape, no certain rest. One might die and simply find oneself in a new form of suffering, trapped in a nightmare reflection of one's sins or cursed to relive traumatic moments eternally. The only escape seems to be the endings where the cycle itself is broken, either by accepting Gehrman's mercy and losing all memory of the truth, or by defeating the moon presence and achieving transformation into something beyond human entirely. Bloodborne's narrative operates on multiple levels simultaneously, telling a surface story about hunting beasts while exploring deeper themes about knowledge, transformation, and the human condition. The game's primary symbols, blood, eyes, and various cosmic entities, carry meanings that resonate throughout the entire experience, creating a cohesive thematic framework that elevates the story beyond simple horror into something more philosophically complex. Blood serves as the game's central symbol, representing simultaneously life, death, healing, corruption, connection, and isolation. In the most literal sense, blood is the substance that flows through living bodies, carrying oxygen and nutrients, sustaining life itself. The Healing Church recognized this fundamental importance and sought to enhance it through blood ministration, using the old blood to cure diseases and strengthen bodies. This represents blood as life-giver, as the essence that separates living from dead. But blood is also the vector of the beast scourge, the substance through which corruption spreads. The more blood one consumes, the closer one comes to transformation into something no longer human. This represents blood as poison, as the agent of degradation rather than improvement. The same substance that heals also destroys, creating a paradox at the heart of Yharnam's society. The citizens cannot survive without blood ministration, yet each treatment brings them closer to becoming beasts. This makes blood a perfect metaphor for addiction or dependence on harmful substances that provide short-term benefits while causing long-term destruction. Blood also represents connection and shared heritage. The vile bloods of Cainhurst developed an entire culture around blood dregs, believing that consuming the blood of others created bonds between people. The Healing Church used blood to create hierarchies, with purer blood reserved for elites, while common citizens received lesser varieties. In both cases, blood becomes a marker of identity and social position, determining one's place in the world. This reflects historical and ongoing reality, where bloodlines and heredity have been used to justify social stratification and exclusion. The game's treatment of menstrual blood and pregnancy adds another layer to this symbolism. Ariana, a woman of Cainhurst blood who works as a lady of the night, can provide her blood to the player. If given a safe haven, she eventually becomes pregnant with what appears to be a Great One's child, though she has no memory of how this occurred. Her fate is tragic. She either survives to birth the creature and goes mad from the experience, or is killed by another NPC who cannot tolerate her presence. This connects blood to fertility, to the violation of bodily autonomy, and to the horror of unwanted pregnancy with cosmic entities. The recurring motif of stillborn or lost children ties into this blood symbolism. The Great Ones uniformly lose their children, creating a cosmic tragedy that drives much of their interaction with humanity. Queen Yharnam carried Mergo, who died before or during birth. Kos's orphan perished in the womb. The moon presence seeks a surrogate child. Ariana births a creature that should not exist. These lost children represent potential that will never be realized, futures that were promised but can never arrive. They are, in essence, the ultimate expression of blood's failure, the inability of even divine or cosmic blood to sustain and continue life. Eyes serve as the game's other primary symbol, representing perception, knowledge, and the pursuit of understanding. The entire philosophy of Byrgenwerth centers on developing eyes on the inside, on gaining new organs of perception that can see truths invisible to ordinary sight. This makes eyes literal gates to knowledge, physical structures that determine what can and cannot be comprehended. The game's treatment of eyes is consistently disturbing. The Byrgenwerth scholars cut open the heads of fishing hamlet villagers to harvest their eyes, treating organs of perception as objects to be collected and studied. The research hall patients have their heads swollen with fluid as doctors attempt to grow additional eyes within their brains. Great Ones are covered in eyes placed in seemingly random locations across their bodies. These images make eyes simultaneously precious and horrifying, valuable but also markers of violation and transformation. The concept of inner eyes versus outer eyes creates a hierarchy of perception. Ordinary human eyes can see only the mundane world, the surface reality that hides cosmic truth. Inner eyes, whether metaphorical or literal, can perceive the Great Ones, can see the nightmare entities that lurk just beyond normal awareness, can understand truths that would drive unprepared minds to madness. This creates a dilemma. Ignorance is comfortable but limiting, while knowledge is liberating but potentially destructive. Blindness takes on special significance in this context. Master Willem and his followers wore blindfolds, deliberately blocking their outer sight to focus on developing inner vision. This suggests that ordinary perception might actually interfere with cosmic understanding, that to truly see one must first accept blindness to mundane reality. Yet those who achieve this inner sight, like Willem himself, often lose their ability to function in normal human society, suggesting that the trade-off might not be worthwhile. The game also uses eyes to represent surveillance and judgment. The Great Ones are often described as watching, observing humanity's actions. The moon presence's name suggests it observes from above, looking down on Yharnam from the night sky. The insight mechanic makes this literal. As players gain insight, they become more visible to cosmic entities, more likely to be observed and affected by forces beyond human comprehension. This turns the act of seeing into something reciprocal. To see the Great Ones is to be seen by them in return. The moon itself serves as a massive eye, watching over Yharnam through the night. It changes from pale to blood red as the game progresses, reflecting the increasing cosmic horror infecting the city. The pale blood that the player character seeks at the game's beginning might refer to this pale moon, suggesting the entire journey is about understanding and potentially confronting the cosmic entity that observes from above. This makes the moon simultaneously beautiful and threatening, a source of light in darkness, but also a reminder that humanity is always being watched by things it cannot fully understand. Transformation serves as a third major theme, manifesting in multiple forms throughout the game. The most obvious is the beast scourge, the physical transformation from human to animal that represents the loss of civilization and the emergence of primal instincts. But transformation also occurs in other directions. The choir seeks to transform into something more than human, to ascend to a state closer to the Great Ones. The School of Mensis attempts transformation through ritual and forced communion with cosmic entities. Even the player character can transform, either becoming trapped like German, dying and losing memory, like in the first ending, or achieving ascension into an infant Great One in the third ending. These transformations are rarely presented as purely positive or purely negative. Becoming a beast is horrifying, but it also represents freedom from the constraints and anxieties of human consciousness. Ascending to cosmic awareness grants understanding, but destroys one's ability to relate to human concerns and relationships. Even remaining fully human has its costs, as it means remaining vulnerable, mortal, and limited in perception. The game suggests that transformation is inevitable. The only question is what form it will take and whether one can maintain any sense of self through the process. The Victorian Gothic setting enhances these themes by creating a world where scientific progress and social order exist in tension with primal forces and cosmic chaos. Victorian society prided itself on rationality, progress, and civilization, believing humanity had evolved beyond its savage origins. Bloodborne's Yharnam represents this worldview, taken to an extreme and then shattered by the reality of the beast scourge. The elaborate architecture, the formal hierarchies, the scientific institutions, all prove powerless against forces that operate according to rules these systems cannot comprehend or contain. The game's Lovecraftian influences also shape its thematic content. Cosmic horror, as developed by H.P. Lovecraft and his contemporaries, centers on the idea that the universe is fundamentally indifferent to humanity, that cosmic entities exist with concerns and consciousness so alien that they cannot be understood, and that true knowledge of reality's nature would destroy human sanity. Bloodborne embraces these concepts while adding its own elements, particularly the focus on blood and physical transformation that Lovecraft rarely emphasized. But Bloodborne also critiques some of Lovecraft's more problematic elements, where Lovecraft's racism often manifested in his treatment of transformation and degeneration as metaphors for racial mixing. Bloodborne presents transformation as a universal human vulnerability, affecting all social classes and backgrounds equally. The game's most noble and educated characters are just as susceptible to the beast scourge as the poorest citizens, suggesting that cosmic horror is democratizing rather than discriminatory. The theme of forbidden knowledge runs throughout the game, questioning whether some truths are better left undiscovered. The scholars of Byrgenwerth uncovered the old blood and unleashed catastrophe. The Healing Church sought to use this knowledge beneficially, but only accelerated the disaster. The School of Mensis gained the cosmic communion they sought, but found it unbearable. Yet the game also suggests that ignorance is not a viable long-term strategy, as Rom's barrier demonstrates. Hiding the truth allows citizens to function day to day, but it does not actually solve any problems or prevent the gradual corruption of reality. This creates the game's central philosophical tension. Knowledge is dangerous but necessary. Transformation is inevitable but unpredictable, and the pursuit of transcendence is both humanity's highest aspiration and its greatest threat. There are no easy answers, no safe paths, no guaranteed outcomes. Every choice carries risk. Every action has consequences, and the most well-intentioned efforts can produce catastrophic results. This mirrors real-world concerns about scientific progress, technological development, and the pursuit of knowledge without adequate consideration of ethical implications. As we reach the end of our journey through Bloodborne's intricate lore, we must confront what the game ultimately asks of us as players and as people. This is not a story with a traditional resolution where good triumphs over evil and order is restored. Instead, it presents multiple possible conclusions, none of them entirely satisfying, all of them carrying their own forms of tragedy and loss. This ambiguity is deliberate, forcing us to grapple with questions that have no definitive answers. The first ending, where the player accepts Gehrman's mercy, represents a return to normalcy and ignorance. The hunter wakes in Yharnam as the sun rises, with no memory of the dream or the cosmic truth they uncovered. They can return to ordinary life, though what form that life takes in a city ravaged by the beast scourge remains unclear. This ending offers peace through forgetting, suggesting that sometimes the kindest thing is to remove knowledge that cannot be processed or used beneficially. But it also represents a failure to break the cycle, as another hunter will eventually take the departed hunter's place in the dream, perpetuating the system that Gehrman created. The second ending, where the player defeats Gehrman but is then claimed by the moon presence, represents the perpetuation of systems and burdens. The hunter frees Gehrman from his eternal servitude, but only by taking his place, becoming the new host of the dream, trapped in the same cycle that imprisoned their predecessor. This ending demonstrates how revolutionary actions can sometimes simply replace one set of chains with another, how overthrowing authority might just create space for new authority rather than actual freedom. Yet it also shows a form of sacrifice, the hunter willingly accepting imprisonment so that others might continue the hunt. The third ending, where the player resists the moon presence and transforms into an infant Great One, represents the achievement of transcendence at the cost of humanity. The hunter has consumed 3 umbilical cords, gained sufficient insight to resist a Great One's power, and successfully challenged a cosmic entity in direct combat. This should be victory, the ultimate triumph over the forces that have oppressed and transformed humanity throughout the game. But the result is not human victory, but human transformation into something else entirely. The hunter becomes what they had spent the entire game fighting against or seeking to understand. Whether this represents evolution or loss, progress or tragedy, remains deliberately unclear. Each ending reflects different philosophies about how to respond to cosmic horror and existential threat. Accept comfort in ignorance, perpetuate cycles while freeing others, transform into something beyond human. None of these options is clearly superior to the others, and different players will reach different conclusions about which represents the best outcome. This is the game's final lesson. In a universe where Great Ones exist, where blood can curse entire civilizations, where nightmares trap souls for eternity, there might not be good endings, only different forms of compromise with forces beyond our control. The legacy of Bloodborne extends beyond its immediate narrative to influence how we think about video game storytelling. The game demonstrated that complex, fragmented narratives requiring active player interpretation could be commercially successful and critically acclaimed. It showed that leaving questions unanswered and mysteries unresolved could be more satisfying than providing comprehensive exposition. And it proved that horror could be both visceral and philosophical, working on multiple levels simultaneously, to create an experience that rewards both immediate emotional engagement and deep analytical thought. The game's approach to lore delivery through item descriptions, environmental storytelling, and cryptic dialogue has influenced countless games since its release. Developers learned that players enjoy piecing together narratives from fragments, that the act of discovery itself can be as rewarding as the information discovered. This has led to more ambitious and experimental approaches to storytelling across the gaming industry, with more titles willing to trust players to engage actively with narrative rather than passively consuming exposition. Bloodborne also contributed to ongoing conversations about knowledge, progress, and the responsibilities that come with pursuing understanding. In an era of rapid technological advancement, where artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and other transformative technologies promise to fundamentally alter human existence, the game's questions about whether some knowledge is too dangerous to pursue feel increasingly relevant. The scholars of Byrgenwerth uncovered the old blood and unleashed catastrophe. The Healing Church tried to use that knowledge beneficially and only made things worse. Modern scientists and engineers face similar dilemmas about how to develop and deploy powerful new capabilities responsibly. The game's treatment of transformation also speaks to contemporary anxieties about identity and change. In a world where technology increasingly allows us to modify our bodies, where social media platforms let us construct and reconstruct our public personas, where the boundary between human and machine grows increasingly blurred, Bloodborne's exploration of what it means to transform while maintaining identity feels prescient. The beast scourge victims lose themselves entirely, becoming something that retains no continuity with what they were. But other transformations in the game, like Rom's ascension or the player's potential transformation into an infant Great One, raise questions about whether continuity of identity is even possible or desirable during fundamental change. The community that has formed around Bloodborne, dedicated to uncovering every secret and interpreting every detail, itself demonstrates the game's lasting impact. Players have spent countless hours collaborating to piece together the lore, debating interpretations, discovering connections that even the developers might not have consciously intended. This collaborative meaning-making represents a form of play that extends far beyond simply completing the game, turning Bloodborne into an ongoing cultural phenomenon rather than a static product. Yet for all its complexity and philosophical depth, Bloodborne remains fundamentally a game about hunting through a gothic nightmare, fighting terrifying creatures and gradually growing stronger through perseverance and skill. The mechanical experience of playing the game, the tense combat, the exploration of interconnected areas, the satisfaction of overcoming seemingly impossible challenges, remains central to its appeal. The lore enriches this experience, but does not replace it. This balance between immediate gameplay satisfaction and deep narrative complexity is part of what makes Bloodborne special. As we close this exploration of Bloodborne's lore, we must acknowledge that much remains mysterious, deliberately unexplained by the developers. We do not know the full history of the Pthumerians or why the Great Ones lose their children. We do not understand the complete nature of the old blood, or whether alternatives to blood ministration might have saved Yharnam. We cannot say with certainty what the Moon Presence truly desires, or whether other Great Ones might be more benevolent. These gaps are not failures of storytelling, but essential features, spaces where imagination and interpretation can flourish. The hunt, as the game itself tells us, is never truly over. There will always be beasts to fight, secrets to uncover, questions to contemplate. Yharnam's nightmare continues regardless of which ending we choose, as new hunters enter the dream and new victims succumb to the scourge. But perhaps that is the point. In a world defined by cycles of violence and transformation, by the eternal tension between knowledge and ignorance, by the constant pull between human limitation and cosmic transcendence, there can be no final resolution, only the choice of how to engage with ongoing struggle. Bloodborne asks us to confront cosmic horror, not by defeating it, but by acknowledging it, by understanding that the universe contains forces beyond our control or comprehension, and by choosing how we will respond to that reality. We can seek comfort in ignorance, embrace the hunt despite its costs, or transform into something beyond human. Each choice is valid. Each carries its own weight. And each represents a different answer to the eternal question. What does it mean to be human in a universe that is fundamentally inhuman? The nightmare swirls and churns unending. The moon hangs pale and distant overhead. The hunt will go on, with or without us, as it has since ancient Pthumeru, and as it will continue into whatever future awaits Yharnam. Whether we choose to participate, to observe, or to turn away, the hunt continues. The blood flows, the eyes watch, and somewhere in the distance, a great one dreams of the child it will never have, while humanity dreams of transcendence it may never safely achieve. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of gaming's most intricate and mesmerizing worlds. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Bloodborne's lore, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more explorations of the stories, themes, and hidden details in the games we love. The hunt may never truly end, but neither does our fascination with the worlds that games create for us to explore. Until next time, may you find your worth in the waking world.